Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to another video. And today I'm going to be doing a TBR of sorts for May and June. So I think I'm going to try something a bit vaguer today. This is going to be a bit of a TBR, but also a sort of just like general reading plans for the next couple of months, vague reading intentions. Because what I have realised over the last few months of doing a TBR video every month is that I love making TBR videos, but I'm not actually very good at following a TBR, which is obviously fine. I like to make lists and that's okay. You don't have to tick everything off on the list that you make. But I was also wondering whether it might be useful for me to make videos that are sort of a half TBR, a half pile of possibilities, talking about some of the books I might read soon, but not covering all of the basis, because sometimes I feel like if I've made a TBR, it's not that I feel pressure to read everything on that TBR necessarily, but I do feel pressure to not read lots of books that are not on that TBR, if that makes sense. So I thought I would do a sort of combined TBR reading intentions for May and June and pick out some books I want to read over the next few months, and specifically talk about like some of the reading challenges, readathons, reading events I want to take part in over the next few months. So I think one of the things I really like about doing TBR videos is kind of mentioning the readathons I'm hoping to take part in, especially because I'm really bad for forgetting to talk about readathons in wrap-up videos. I will definitely not get to all of these, and I will definitely read lots of things that are not on this list. So yeah, I will start off by talking about the one book that I'm currently reading, and that is an audiobook. I'm listening to Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell. I started this in April for a read-along hosted by Art from Bookshelf Odyssey. I'll leave his channel link down below, and I have read like less than a quarter of Wives and Daughters in April. I'm listening to an audiobook. It's a reread for me. I have read it 3 or 4 times before, so I know the book very well, and it's just nice to reread it and rediscover it, and I'm just going to listen to it slowly in between other things. I quite like having a reread audiobook on the go for driving and things like that, but I'm not listening to it as my like main audiobook, and I'm just going through it slowly, and that's really nice. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention. And then I thought I would quickly talk about the books I currently have out from the library. So I've got one audiobook out from the library, Funny Story by Emily Henry. Emily Henry is a real favourite author of mine. I think she just writes like the absolute best romance, where there is just like the perfect balance of love story and life stuff. I've absolutely loved the 4 books I've read by her so far: Me and You on Vacation, Beach Read, Book Lovers, and Happy Place. And now I am gonna start Funny Story, which I'm sure I will love too, because it's Emily Henry. Of course I will. Then I have 2 physical books out from the library. So here we have Beast in the Shadows by Edogawa Rampo. So this is a Japanese like murder mystery novel, translated from the Japanese by Ian Hughes. This is a Japanese crime classic from 1928. I've been vaguely meaning to read something by Edogawa Rampo for ages. His name is a pseudonym and it's an anagram of Edgar Allan Poe, which I think is quite fun. And recently someone was talking about it on BookTube. I think it was Jennifer Loves Books. That made me go and check if my library had it, and they did, so I got it out, and it's very tiny, so I think I will try and read this. And then I also have out from the library this is The Land in Winter by Andrew Miller. I put a bookmark in, but I haven't started it yet, but this is one of the books on the Walter Scott Prize long list, and short list indeed. I like Andrew Miller. I read his previous book, And Now We Should Be Entirely Free, and loved it when that was on the Walter Scott Prize shortlist a few years ago, and I'm looking forward to this. I feel like I've talked quite enough about all the Walter Scott Prize books on my channel over the past few months that I don't need to talk too much about them here, but this one is set in the 1960s and I'm really looking forward to reading it. And talking of the Walter Scott Prize, another one of my reading plans for May and June is to read some more books from the Walter Scott Prize long list and shortlist. So I want to read the whole shortlist. I've read half the shortlist already, so the books I have left from the shortlist are The Land in Winter by Andrew Miller, The Book of Days by Francesca Kay, and The Safekeep by Yael van der Wooden. I have requested The Safekeep on audiobook from the library, and I'm waiting for that hold to come in. And I would also like to read 2 other books from the long list, maybe in May and June, we'll see, one of which is The First Friend by Malcolm Knox, and the other of which is A Sign of Her Own by Sarah Marsh, which actually I definitely want to read in May, because that would also count towards the Spoonies Readathon. So that moves us nicely on to the Spoonies Readathon, which is something else I want to be participating in May. So the Spoonies Readathon is hosted by Emily from Novel Novels and Kat from Brews and Reviews, and it's all about reading books with representation of disability, chronic illness, chronic pain. And I read some books for this last year, and I'm really hoping to do the same this year. A Sign of Her Own, which is a historical novel dealing with the deaf community, would fit for this readathon, and there are a couple of other books I'd be interested in reading, one of which I have on my Kindle, which is Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonham Young, which is a rom-com with disability representation from an Own Voices author. I've heard great things about this before. It's been on my Kindle for ages. One of those books I think that I bought in a 99p Kindle sale, so I'm going to try and finally read that in May, I hope. And then there are a couple of other books that have been on my radar lately that I would kind of like to read for this. I don't own them though, so I think whether or not I end up reading them for the Spoonies Readathon will depend on whether I am near a bookshop and I'm tempted to buy them. So one of those books is Cling Film by Bethany Handley, which is a poetry collection. The author is a wheelchair user, and I gather in this poetry collection writes quite a lot about disability. I saw this book mentioned in the bookseller and thought it sounded really interesting, and I have been meaning to read more poetry and haven't been reading much this year, so I might try and get my hands upon this if I spot it in a bookshop. And then the other book that's been on my radar that a lot of people have been talking about lately is Hunchback by Sabu Ishikawa. This is a Japanese novel translated by Polly Barton, and it's a novel from an Own Voices author about a disabled woman who writes a lot of very erotic fiction online, and what happens when one of the carers in the care home she lives in finds out about this. It's one of those books I've seen like at the till at Waterstones lately, and have been tempted to buy and haven't, and now I'm regretting not buying it, and I kind of think I might buy it in the next few weeks and read it for the Spoonies Readathon. Another readathon that's taking place in May is Misery May, hosted by Gemma Books and Scott from Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, and the premise of Misery May is all about reading miserable books, and I have no doubt some of the books I read in May will be miserable, as many books are. I feel like some of the books on the World Scott Prize long list will probably be quite miserable, but I do have a couple of things on my physical TBR that I thought would work for this, that I thought I might just pick out as possibilities. So one of them, reaching over to my other TBR shelf. You see, you think this is my TBR, but I have a secret other TBR shelf now, so my TBR is out of control. It's fine. So here I have Tiamo by Hannah Ostavik, and this is a Norwegian novel translated by Martin Aiken. Well, I say it's a novel. I think it's a very heavily biographical novel that kind of combines memoir and novel / novella, looking at the author's grief after the death of her husband. This is one of the books that Gemma mentioned in her announcement video, and I have heard great things about this all over BookTube, and so I picked this up at a bookshop a couple of months ago, and I haven't read it yet, so I thought this might be one to read for Misery May. And the other book on my shelf, which would definitely, no doubt, count for Misery May, is this. This is Demos by George Gissing, and George Gissing is a very, very miserable writer, so I have no doubt that this will be a miserable book, as his books usually are. This is a Victorian novel that I've had on several TBRs of late and still haven't read, and it would be nice to get to it in May. Will I? Who knows? It's fine, but I might. I don't know too much about it, except that it deals with socialism in the Victorian period, and I love George Gissing, even though he's very miserable. So there we go. So those are my readathon picks for May. I'm sure there will be some other readathons in June I want to take part in. In fact, I'm going to host a little readathon for my BookTube anniversary, my 10-year BookTube anniversary, but more on that soon. But I thought I would just pick out some books for the May readathons, and I will think about the June readathons when we get to June. I won't do another TBR video then, because I quite like the idea of having 2 months to pick and choose some of these books. But anyway, another thing I wanted to kind of talk about in this video in terms of my reading plans is my monthly challenges and sort of monthly book clubs and that kind of thing. So over on my Patreon, I host a historical fiction book club where we read a work of historical fiction every month. And in May, we're going to be reading 15 Wild Decembers by Karen Powell, which is a novel about the life of Emily Bronte. I've reserved that at the library, so I'm waiting for that to come in, but I'm quite excited to start reading that. And then in June, we're going to be reading a very short book that I already have on my TBR. One of the reasons why I keep reaching down there to find the really short books on my TBR is that I've separated out the really short books from the like regular length books on my TBR, because I feel like in previous years I've had a bad habit of like reaching for really short books ahead of longer books in order to like read more. Whether or not fully consciously. So I thought this year I would separate out the short books from the normal length books on my TBR and like only reach for the short books if I really feel like them, rather than like going to them for a quick read, unless I really want a quick read, if that makes sense. Anyway, you don't need to know the tangent of my TBR shelf organisation. Anyway, The Blue Fox by Sean is our historical fiction book club pick for June, which I'm excited for. This is a novel in translation. It's translated from the Icelandic by Victoria Cribb, and it is set in Iceland in the 19th century. And it looks at like three characters who are drawn together by circumstance. And I kind of don't want to know too much more about it than that because it's so short. But I'm really looking forward to this one. I've heard very good things. And then another like group read I'm part of is Page Turners with Catchers Reading the Globe challenge. So the classics pick for May and June is on my TBR somewhere, hiding away. My TBR is like Jenga. If you disrupt a book, you never know what's going to happen. So here we have Baron Barge by Alexander Lernet Hollenia. This novel is by an Austrian author. It's translated from the German by Richard and Clara Winston. And it was first published in the 1950s. And this novel is a kind of slightly surreal novel about the First World War. So I think there's a cavalry officer who is about to die in the First World War and then ends up being transplanted to another land, and otherworldly things happen. So that sounds fascinating. I realise I said that I kept all the short books separately and then this one was on the TBR with the others. Anyway, as I said, you don't need the tangent about my TBR organisation. Am I gonna go and reorganise my TBR after this video? Yes. But I'm excited for this one, and it'd be nice to keep reading along with Katya's Reading the Globe challenge, which I'm really enjoying so far. I have generally been joining in for all the classics and not really taking part for the contemporary and YA books. There are a few months I'm going to join in, but it basically kind of depends on whether or not I have access to the books at my library. But June's pick for Reading the Globe YA is Kiki's Delivery Service by Aiko Kodono, translated by Emily Ballisteri, which is a novel I've been meaning to read for ages and ages and ages, and my library has it on ebook, so I'm going to read that. I love the Studio Ghibli film of Kiki's Delivery Service, and I'm very excited to read the book and discover what it's like and how far away from the book the screen adaptation is, because I have read House Moving Castle and I've seen the film House Moving Castle, and I love the film House Moving Castle so much, possibly more than the book, but they are not that much to do with each other. So anyway, I'm excited to read Kiki's Delivery Service. If you have not seen the film, it's great, go and watch it. But it's about a young witch coming of age and learning how to use her magic. And I just hope there's still a talking cat in the book, because if there's not, I will be sad. And one other thing I have been sort of taking part in this year is Ben's Read Good Challenge. I'll leave links down below about that, as well as about Catcher's Reading the Globe challenge. To be honest, I haven't been doing very well on Ben's Read Good Challenge. Basically, I have been picking out books from my TBR for the challenge in my monthly TBRs and then not reading them. But you know, I'm quite enjoying picking out books for it, so I guess I will just continue to do that all year. May's challenge is Déjà Vu, so reread a book or read an author you've read before, and I'm currently rereading Wives and Daughters, so you know, I'll count that. Will I finish it in May? Probably not, but that's fine. And then June's challenge is Reading Shame Forgiveness Month. Read a book you feel ashamed not to have read yet. And I'm very ashamed to say that I'm still reading Varney the Vampire, and I still haven't finished it, and I have read none of it in April, even though I really wanted to. So maybe I'll read this in June, because I do regret that I've been reading it for such a long time, because while it was originally serialized and it's a penny dreadful and it works very well read spread out, I don't really like reading a book over this long a period of time. In general, I think I'm more suited to reading a book, finishing it, starting a new one, and I've been reading this for over a year and I just need to give some more time to it. So maybe June is the month of Vine and the Vampire. And then one of my big reading goals for the year is to read through all the works of Anthony Trollope. So I do want to be reading some Anthony Trollope in May and June. So I think one book I definitely want to read is The Golden Lion of Grandpere, which was one that I had on a TBR earlier in the year and haven't got to yet. So I would have really liked to read that. I've got that on my Kindle and I think it's quite a short one. And then I thought I would let my Anthony Trollope TBR jar decide what other Trollope I should read in the next few months. So let's pick one out. What have we got? The Landleaguers. Am I going to change my mind and read a different Anthony Trollope book? Maybe, I don't know. I mean, to be honest, I don't know much about the Anthony Trollope books I've got left. I just know I want to read all of his books. I'm actually going to pick one other book out the TBR jar for Anthony Trollope. Not necessarily because I am going to read it instead of the Landleaguers, but because I feel like if I managed to, it would be nice to read 3 Anthony Trollope books in May and June. Partly because I know I won't read any Anthony Trollope in July when it's Jane Austen July, but also because I just read a short story collection by Anthony Trollope, and while I was reading it, I was just like, Anthony Trollope is the best. I love his book so much. Why do I ever read anything else? I could just be reading Anthony Trollope all day and that would be great. I mean, I couldn't. There's other things to do in life, and other books to read, and a lot of other books I love to read, but Anthony Trollope is great. Okay, the other one I picked out of my jar after that long ramble is The Bertrams, which I'm also excited for. So I'm gonna have a think about these 2 books and check whether I had a note about buddy reading these with anyone, because I did like vaguely talk about buddy reading some Anthony Trollope books with some people earlier in the year, and then I will read some of these. And then another of my big reading goals for 2025 is to get through some of the books that have been on my TBR for the longest. And at the beginning of the year, I specifically picked out like the 19 books that have been on my TBR for the longest. And I have so far this year been making good progress. I've read 8 of them. I've been doing quite well at reading 2 a month. So I'm going to try and continue with that in May and June, especially because I probably also am not going to read any of them in July because Jane Austen July, etc. So let's pick some books out the TBR jar and see. What do we have? We have Good Girls Die Last. I'm going to pick them all out and then I'll show you the books. The Devil's Finger, More Than You'll Ever Know. And then my final pick from the TBR jar is Huckleberry Finn, which also would work quite well for reading Shame Forgiveness Month because I have been meaning to read this for ages. And also I recently bought James by Percival Everett, which you can just about see, in the corner of my video, and I need to read Huckleberry Finn first. Here we go, 4 books from my TBR. We have an American classic, a modern thriller, another thriller, and how do I even describe Sandra Bohm's books? She's someone who I know in real life, and I love her writing. So I really should get to this. I'm excited to read this. This novel is supernatural and wild and dark. I feel like that's the best way to describe Sandra's books. I loved her first novel, The Psychopath Club, and I'm very excited to read The Devil's Finger. So those are some books that I might read in May and June. But while this has been quite a long list of books, I will not read all of them, and I will definitely read some other stuff. And I think what I need in my TBR, like pile of possibilities, flexibility-wise, is not so much like, I don't mind having a long list that I don't get to everything on, but I feel like when I have a long list, I therefore feel like I can't read other things, which I don't want to feel. So I think a kind of like vague reading intentions, but not covering all the different kinds of things I want to read works for me, maybe. We'll see. There are definitely some other things I want to pick up in the next few months. I've got quite a few proof copies I need to get to. I also would like to pick up some more Victorian literature. I know I have Demos on this list, and Wives and Daughters, which I'm currently reading, and some Anthony Trollope, but I just feel like I haven't been reading as much Victorian literature this year as I want to read. And then I also feel like there have been quite a lot of books that I put on TBRs in the previous few months that I haven't read yet, that I would kind of like to read over the next few months. Not necessarily, but I might do. There are also a few books I want to read for like writing research kind of stuff, which I might pick up. And I also have got quite a few new books recently, some of which I'm keen to read quite quickly. I need to do a really big book haul at some point in May or June, because I feel like I haven't done one for ages, and I've actually got a lot of new books on my shelves which I would quite like to show you. But yeah, I'll do that at some point soon. Anyway, so this was quite a rambly, like vague reading intentions, possibilities, reading plans thing for May and June. I mean, it was just a TBR, wasn't it? It is just a TBR. But if I think of it as a vague reading plan rather than a TBR, I feel like I will feel more freedom to read things that aren't on this list. But I am excited to read some of the things that are on this list. How much time I'll have to read in May and June, I don't really know. As I know I've said before on this channel, because I work freelance, I feel like the amount of time I have to read in different months is like really, really variable, just depending on my workload. And April, I ended up like not having as much time to read as I thought I would. And May, I currently feel like I will have quite a lot of time to read in May, but I may be mistaken. I've been rambling for quite long enough, so I will stop now. Okay, so I had just wrapped up this video. I had turned the camera off, possibly moved the camera. Anyway, it's fine. But I picked up my phone and I saw I had some YouTube notifications, and I saw an announcement for a reading event in June. So I thought I would just come back and tell you about that as well. And that event is JoyReading June, which is being hosted by Charlie Brooke Reads, Gemma Books, and Jack from Spread Book Joy, and is kind of in honour of Alice from Alice and the Giant Bookshelf, who passed away last year. So this was a project, a reading event that she was working on last year that didn't happen because she passed away. And so Charlie, Gem and Jack are like taking it on in her stead this year. And basically the premise of JoyReading June is all about reading books that bring you joy, reading joyfully, reading books that make you happy, and, you know, maybe like worrying less about your reading, I suppose, which I just think is really, really lovely. Maybe my like vague reading plans intentions fits quite well with reading joyfully in a way. And as I have said earlier in this video, reading Anthony Trollope is such a joy for me, so maybe I will read tons of Anthony Trollope for JoyReading June, because few authors bring me quite as much joy as Anthony Trollope does. As I said, I literally just learned about this reading event moments after finishing this video, and I just like very quickly watched Charlie's video announcement of it because I thought it'd be nice to mention in this video anyway, because I think it sounds really lovely. So I'll leave links about that down below, and I will, yeah, participate in some way. Okay, this video has been quite long enough, so I will actually stop now. Do let me know down in the comments what you're planning and reading over the next few months, if there are any particular readathons, reading challenges and events that you're taking part in, and otherwise I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.